The Titanic. Just saying the name, it brings up so many images, doesn't it?
Instantly, yeah.
The sheer scale, that incredible luxury, and of course that massive 1997 film.
Yeah.
It really put the Titanic back on the map for millions.
Absolutely it did. A cultural phenomenon.
But, for all the Hollywood drama and romance, there's just so much more beneath the surface, isn't there?
Yeah.
A really compelling mix of, human ambition, amazing engineering, and then the harsh realities of nature.
That's it, exactly.
So our mission today is to really take a deep dive. We've got a stack of sources here, everything from heartbreaking survivor accounts, detailed scientific reports, even historical debates. We just try and pull out the really key bits of knowledge, separate the solid facts from maybe some of the myths that have grown up around it, and just try to understand why this specific tragedy still grips us, over 110 years later?
It's fascinating, isn't it? And the ship itself, I mean, what a statement. The RMS Titanic, built up in Belfast by Harland and Wolff, was the largest ship afloat when it was finished. It set off on its maiden voyage, April 10th, 1912, from Southampton.
Okay.
Then quick stops in Cherbourg in France and Queenstown, which is Cobb now, in Ireland before heading out across the Atlantic for New York City.
Packed with people.
Oh, completely. Around 2,240 souls, as they used to say, passengers and crew. And it was everyone, from the absolute heights of society, the Astors and Guggenheims, down to hundreds of immigrants just hoping for a new start in America.
Quite the cross-section.
Yeah.
And the ship itself was, it was a marvel for its day.
Truly.
I mean, the features they built in a double-bottom hull,
Yeah.
those 15 watertight bulkhead compartments.
Yeah, the famous compartments.
Yeah, with electric doors you could close from the bridge. It must have felt like the absolute peak of maritime engineering.
Yeah.
Really cutting-edge stuff.
It absolutely was. And that feeling, that sense of, near invincibility, that's really what fed into the whole unsinkable myth, wasn't it?
Ah, yes, the unsinkable label.
Yeah.
How much truth is there to that?
Well, it's interesting. It wasn't like, White Star Line plastered unsinkable on every poster before the voyage. It was more nuanced.
Okay.
Promotional stuff definitely used phrases like practically unsinkable or designed to be unsinkable. They heavily, heavily emphasize all these advanced safety features we just mentioned.
Right. Selling the safety aspect.
Exactly. And that, maybe ironically, created this public perception of almost total safety. But, similar claims were made for other big liners of the time, too. It wasn't unique to Titanic. So it's kind of marketing spin amplified by public excitement, perhaps?
So less a deliberate falsehood, more marketing, getting ahead of reality, maybe. And then tragedy made it infamous.
I think that's a fair way to put it, yeah.
Do you think that feeling that it was practically unsinkable maybe led to a bit of complacency on board?
That's a really good question. It's hard to measure, obviously, but you have to think that widespread belief probably lowered the sense of immediate danger for some, both crew and passengers. And that delay, that lack of urgency later on, it had terrible consequences.
Yeah, you can see how that might happen. Okay, so let's jump to the night itself. April 14th, 1912. What were the conditions like out there?
Eerily calm, actually. That's what many survivors reported. No moon, very clear skies, bitterly, bitterly cold, freezing temperatures.
And ice. They knew there was ice around.
Oh, yes. They had received several warnings throughout the day, sporadic messages from other ships reporting ice fields in the area, little pings of danger, you could say, that maybe weren't given the weight they should have been.
And then it happened.
Around 11:30 p.m., ship's time, the lookout, Frederick Fleet, spots it, an iceberg, dead ahead.
A direct hit.
Not quite, and that's a key point. It wasn't a head-on collision. The ship tried to turn, but it grazed along the iceberg's submerged edge on the starboard side.
Oh.
And this impact didn't rip one huge hole like you see in some drawings. Instead, it buckled the hull plates, popped the rivets, and essentially opened up seams between the plates along maybe 250, 300 feet.
Like letting water in through multiple smaller gaps rather than one big one?
Exactly, and the critical thing was which compartments flooded. Water poured into 5 of the forward watertight compartments and maybe slightly into a 6th.
And the design limit was?
The ship could float with any 2 compartments flooded, even the first 3 or the first 4, but 5, no. With 5 breached, the bow would dip too low, water would spill over the tops of the bulkheads into the next compartment and then the next, a domino effect. Its fate was sealed right then, really.
Just mathematically doomed from that point. Wow. But okay, moving beyond the steel and the ice, The human stories, that's what really hits home, isn't it?
It truly is. The scale of personal loss is just staggering.
I was reading about Elizabeth Shutes. She was a governess, about 40. Her account of the lifeboat launching, it's chaos. Men with hands too cold to properly manage the ropes, and then that sound she described, the awful wail from the water afterwards.
Chilling, absolutely chilling.
And she reflected on all the needless luxuries on board, wondering why things like enough lifeboats weren't prioritized. It's a powerful observation from someone who was right there.
It really is.
And then there's Charlotte Collier, second-class passenger. Her story of arriving in New York, desperately searching for her husband, realizing he was gone. That experience was repeated hundreds of times over. Families just ripped apart.
The uncertainty and the grief must have been overwhelming.
And little Eva Hart, she was only 7, lost her father.
Yeah.
But she lived a long life, spoke about it often. Her attitude was incredible. Life has to be lived irrespective of the possible dangers. Amazing resilience, these voices.
Yeah.
They're just incredibly powerful.
They absolutely are. And they highlight things like the lifeboat situation, which, looking back, seems almost unbelievable.
Tell us about that. How many boats were there, actually?
Okay, so Titanic carried 20 lifeboats in total. That was 14 standard wooden ones, 4 collapsible ones with canvas sides, and 2 smaller emergency cutters.
Okay, and capacity.
Total capacity for those 20 boats was 11,178 people. Now, here's the kicker. That number was actually more than the British Board of Trade regulations required at the time for a ship of Titanic's massive size.
More than required. But
Yeah.
wait, how many people were on board?
About 2,200. So the lifeboats, even if filled perfectly, could only hold about half the people on the ship, and maybe only a third of the ship's maximum passenger capacity.
So the regulations were just completely outdated for these huge new ships.
Exactly. They were based on tonnage from years earlier and hadn't kept pace with ship size. It was a massive systemic failure waiting to happen.
And then the loading.
Yeah.
You hear stories they weren't even filled properly.
That's the other tragedy layered on top. Many boats were launched way under capacity. Some estimates say they averaged only about 60% full.
Why? What was going on?
A combination of things, it seems. Panic, definitely. Confusion, a lack of clear orders or organization. And crucially, the crew hadn't really been drilled or trained properly for a full-scale evacuation like this. They didn't know how to load efficiently or confidently under pressure.
Just devastating. All those empty seats.
It's heartbreaking to think about. And we hear about the women and children first protocol.
Right, was that actually followed?
Broadly speaking, yes, it seems it was prioritized, especially early on. But the tragic reality is many women and children still died. Not because the protocol was ignored, but because the whole process was so chaotic. They couldn't get to the boat deck, or communication failed, or they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. The system, or lack thereof, failed them.
Such chaos.
Yeah.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. For so many people listening, their main image of the Titanic probably comes from that James Cameron movie.
The 1997 film, huge impact.
Huge. It undeniably brought the story back to life for a whole new generation, sparked massive interest, which is great. It's perhaps why we're doing this deep dive now.
Yeah.
But how accurate was it? Where did Hollywood maybe stretch the truth?
Well, it's a fantastic piece of filmmaking, no doubt. But yeah, liberties were definitely taken for dramatic effect. The big one, obviously, is the central romance.
Jack and Rose.
Jack and Rose, pure fiction. I mean, the idea of a third-class passenger like Jack wandering freely into first-class areas, dining with the elite.
Not likely.
Extremely unlikely. Class segregation was incredibly strict on ships like Titanic. Third-class passengers had their own separate decks, dining rooms, entrances. They were often kept separate for, believe it or not, public health and quarantine reasons, too. The mingling shown in the film just wouldn't have happened like that.
Okay, so the romance is pure Hollywood. What about Jack Dawson himself? Was there a real Jay Dawson?
Sort of, but not the Jack Dawson from the movie. There was a real Joseph Dawson on the crew list. He was a young guy, 23, Irish, worked down in the boiler rooms as a coal trimmer.
And he died.
He did, sadly. His body was recovered, and he's buried in Halifax. After the movie came out, his grave suddenly became this huge tourist attraction. Cameron apparently had no idea there was a real Jay Dawson when he wrote the script. It was just a coincidence.
Wow, that's quite a coincidence.
I mean,
Okay, what about the locked gates? The film shows third-class passengers trapped below deck.
that's another area where the film dramatizes things, but there's a kernel of truth. Some gates were kept locked, partly for those quarantine rules I mentioned, and some survivor accounts do suggest crew members tried to hold steerage passengers back initially.
But they weren't totally trapped.
Not necessarily. Evidence suggests many of those barriers weren't that substantial, and people did manage to break through or find other ways up. The bigger problem for many third-class passengers was probably just confusion. The ship was enormous, a labyrinth. Many didn't speak English well, couldn't read the signs, and simply didn't know how to get to the boat deck quickly. By the time many found their way, the last boats were already leaving.
So it was less about malice, more about disorientation and poor communication in a crisis.
Largely, yes. The film amps up the conflict for drama. Another big point of contention was the portrayal of Officer Murdoch.
Right, the film shows him,
Well,
taking his own life.
yes, which was a major inaccuracy, and one Cameron later said he regretted including. Overwhelming survivor testimony points to Murdoch working heroically right to the end, launching lifeboats, doing his duty. He was likely swept off the deck as the ship went down. While there were some confusing, contradictory reports immediately after the disaster, the heroic account is far better supported.
That's important to clarify.
Yeah.
And J. Bruce Ismay, the White Star Line chairman, the film paints him pretty negatively.
It does. It shows him sneaking onto a lifeboat. The reality is a bit more complex. He did get into one of the collapsible lifeboats, yes.
Selfishly.
Well, his claim, and some witnesses supported it, was that he boarded only when there were no more women or children nearby, and the boat needed crew to get away. However, he faced immense public criticism afterwards, basically branded a coward by many. He lived with that stigma for the rest of his life, so the film reflected that public condemnation, using it for dramatic effect.
Got it. Any other smaller things the movie tweaked?
Oh sure, lots of little details enthusiasts pick up on, like characters using flashlights, which weren't common, then they'd have used oil lamps. Rose mentioning Sigmund Freud, whose major relevant works were published years after 1912. The design of the wireless radio room wasn't quite right either. Minor things, mostly.
Okay. But overall, despite the fictional elements and tweaks,
the film was hugely successful in making people care about the Titanic again. It sparked that curiosity, made the history accessible, and that's valuable. You know, it leads to conversations like this one.
absolutely. Okay, let's pivot from Hollywood back to the harder science of it. Beyond the iceberg, what did we learn about why the ship sank the way it did? The engineering, the materials. What went wrong there?
This is where it gets really interesting, especially after the wreck was discovered and they could analyze actual pieces of the ship.
Right, the metallurgy.
Exactly. Studies on the hull steel recovered revealed some really critical things. First, the steel itself.
Yeah.
While it met the standards of 1912, it was significantly different from modern shipbuilding steel.
How so?
Primarily, it was much more brittle, especially in cold temperatures. They did tests called Charpy impact tests on recovered samples. These basically measure how much energy a material can absorb before fracturing.
Okay.
And the results showed that the Titanic's steel had a high ductile to brittle transition temperature, meaning it became brittle, almost like glass, at temperatures that were actually above freezing. The North Atlantic that night was about -2 degrees Celsius.
So the steel was already in a brittle state just from the cold water.
Precisely. It was primed to fracture on impact, rather than deform or bend like modern steel would.
Wow. Okay, what else? You mentioned rivets earlier.
Yes, the rivets are another key part of the story. Remember, the damage wasn't one big gash, but seems parting. Analysis showed the wrought iron rivets used in parts of the hull, particularly near the bow and stern where machines couldn't reach easily. They contained high levels of slag. That's impurities, basically glassy bits within the iron. Too much slag makes the rivets weaker and more prone to snapping under stress. It's thought these weaker rivets failed, allowing the hull plates to separate when the iceberg hit.
So weak points built right in, unintentionally.
Seems likely. Plus, the way they punched the rivet holes back then might have created tiny stress cracks that could also have contributed.
Any other factors?
Well, there's evidence the quality of the steel plates themselves wasn't perfectly uniform. Some might have been more brittle than others. And engineers back then didn't fully understand something called notch sensitivity.
Notch sensitivity.
Yeah, it means that sharp corners or design features, like around hatch openings, can concentrate stress dramatically. So even if the main plate was strong, a crack could start easily at one of these stress points and then race through the brittle steel. And finally, speed matters. Steel behaves differently under rapid impact. Hitting the iceberg at over 20 knots likely made the steel behave even more brittly than it might have in a slower collision. We saw hints of this when Titanic's sister ship, the Olympic, had an earlier collision.
So it really was a combination, not just one single thing.
Exactly. It wasn't one fatal flaw. It was the specific steel chemistry, the cold water temperature, the likely quality issues with the rivets, design elements creating stress points, and the speed of impact. All these factors came together in that specific moment to create that specific lethal pattern of damage that doomed the ship so quickly.
A powerful and tragic lesson in how multiple factors can align. Okay, so the ship sinks. Dawn breaks on April 15th. What happens next? The rescue, the aftermath.
The world was waiting, absolutely desperate for news. Wireless telegraphy, the Marconi system, was still relatively new, but it played a huge, if flawed, role.
How so? Flawed.
Well, Titanic's signal was strong, but it also created a lot of interference, like static for other ships. And crucially, the nearest ship, the SS Californian, was maybe only 10 miles away, close enough to potentially see the distress rockets.
10 miles, they could have been there so quickly.
Agonizingly close. But their wireless operator had shut down his radio for the night. Apparently earlier, Titanic's operator had basically told him to shut up because he was interfering while Titanic was transmitting commercial messages for passengers. So the Californian missed the SOS calls.
That's brutal. Who did hear them?
The RMS Carpathia heard the distress call. They were much further away, about 58 miles. But their captain, Arthur Rostron, immediately turned the ship around and raced towards Titanic's last known position at full speed, dodging icebergs all the way. Incredible seamanship.
And they picked up the survivors.
Yes. They arrived on the scene about an hour, maybe an hour and a half after Titanic went under. They found the lifeboats scattered across the freezing water and managed to rescue all 706 survivors.
Just over 700 people saved out of 2,200.
A terrible loss.
And the arrival in New York.
Yeah.
What was that like?
Intense. The Carpathia sailed into New York Harbor on April 18th, docking at Pier 54. There were crowds of, estimates say, 40,000 people waiting in the pouring rain. Journalists, family members, just onlookers, immense grief and shock.
Must have been overwhelming. Were there efforts to help the survivors? Many must have lost everything.
Oh, absolutely. Relief efforts kicked in almost immediately. And it's notable how women's organizations really stepped up. Groups like the Women's Relief Committee, the Travelers' Aid Society, the Council of Jewish Women. They provided food, clothing, money, shelter, especially for the second and third class survivors who arrived with nothing. A real testament to community action in a crisis.
That's good to hear. And then came the official inquiries, right? I'm trying to figure out what happened and who was responsible.
Yes, major inquiries were held, both in the U.S., led by Senator William Alden Smith, and in the U.K., led by Lord Mersey. They interviewed hundreds of witnesses, experts.
What did they conclude?
They covered similar ground. Both highlighted the hopelessly out-of-date lifeboat regulations. Both criticized Captain Smith for not slowing down or changing course despite multiple ice warnings. They pointed to the lifeboats being launched underfilled and often without enough trained crew.
Did they blame the White Star Line?
Not directly, in terms of legal negligence for the sinking itself. Both inquiries essentially concluded the disaster was an act of God or resulted from following standard shipping practices of the time, even the high speed in an ice region. However, the British inquiry made a crucial statement.
What was that?
They said that maintaining such a high speed after receiving ice warnings, while maybe considered standard practice then, would without doubt be negligence in any similar case in the future. That was huge. It signaled a major shift in expected standards of care.
So, even if not legally liable then, it set a new precedent.
Absolutely. It put the entire industry on notice.
And that led to real changes in safety.
Oh, profound changes. The Titanic disaster was a brutal wake-up call. It directly led to the first International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea, SOLAS, in 1914.
SOLAS, right. Still the foundation of maritime safety today.
Exactly. SOLAS mandated things like enough lifeboat space for everyone on board, mandatory lifeboat drills, regular ship inspections. It also required ships to maintain a 24-hour radio watch, so distress calls wouldn't be missed, like by the Californian. And the International Ice Patrol was established, funded by maritime nations, specifically to track icebergs in the North Atlantic and warn shipping.
Direct, concrete actions stemming straight from the tragedy.
Absolutely. And shipbuilding changed too. Titanic's surviving sister ship, the Olympic, got a major safety refit, higher bulkheads, more lifeboats. The third sister, Britannic, still under construction, was redesigned with even more safety features like a double hull along the engine rooms.
Fascinating how disaster drives innovation, albeit at terrible cost. You also mentioned cultural impact. Any strange coincidences?
There's the famous one, Morgan Robertson's novella, Futility, or The Wreck of the Titan, published 14 years before Titanic sailed.
14 years. What was it about?
It described a massive, supposedly unsinkable British ocean liner named the Titan, largest ship afloat, hits an iceberg in the North Atlantic on a cold April night, doesn't have enough lifeboats, huge loss of life. The similarities are just uncanny. Ship size, cause of sinking, lack of lifeboats, even the name, Titan. Pure coincidence, apparently, but incredibly eerie.
That is genuinely chilling. So bringing it all together, think about everything we've unpacked today. What's the lasting takeaway? Why does Titanic still resonate so strongly?
I think it's because it operates on so many levels, right? It's not just a shipwreck. It's a snapshot of an era, the Gilded Age, strict class structures, immense confidence in technology. It's a story of human error, but also incredible courage and resilience. And it's a stark reminder of how our relationship with technology and nature is always complex, always evolving.
A microcosm of society, in a way, sailing towards an unforeseen fate.
Beautifully put. And there's that final layer, perhaps, the knowledge that this immense tragedy, this staggering loss of life, it paradoxically forced changes that have saved countless lives since. SOLAS, the Ice Patrol, these came directly from the Titanic sinking.
Right.
So here's a final thought, maybe for you to ponder. Does that transformation tragedy leading directly to greater safety make our enduring fascination with Titanic a kind of ongoing collective lesson? Or is it simply that we're drawn time and again to these epic tales of human ambition meeting the unforgiving power of the natural world? Maybe it's both.